Good day. This is the Client Psychology Program webinar. I'm Dr. Charles Chafin with the CFP Board Center for Financial Planning, and I'm pleased to introduce the co-director of the Client Psychology Program from Wharton, Dr. Chris Gatesy from the Wharton School.
Thanks, Charles.
And Dr. Gatesy is also is one of the founding co-editors of Financial Planning Review, and I am the executive editor of Financial Planning Review, the academic journal from the CFP Board Center for Financial Planning. So we're pleased to talk today about our upcoming client psychology program happening in July in San Francisco. But before we do that, we want to introduce you to Ben and Colleen. So Ben and Colleen. Ben is 59 and Colleen is 49. Ben owns a cleaning supply company that he started with his first wife, Nina, years ago. Nina still retains 33% of that company. Ben and Colleen never discussed the ex-wife Nina's involvement with the company. Ben is a spender, a big spender. He has debts that he hasn't even disclosed to Colleen, let alone his financial planner. Colleen knows about these debts. She says she has suspected it over the years, but she's never really confronted Ben or really even discussed it with him. And any time that the topic of money or retirement potentially comes about, Ben's attention wanders elsewhere. He doesn't want to engage with it. And Colleen has sensed that there's real stress and fear with regard to money and retirement, but she hasn't really taken the time to address it. She herself sees herself as kind of the family CFO between the two of them. John and Joan are Ben and Colleen's children. John is 14 and Joan is 10.
Mary Jo, Ernest, and Jacob, whom you can see on the screen, are Ben's children with his ex-wife, Nina. Jacob lives in a community that supports individuals with special needs, and Ben and Colleen want to help support Jacob for the rest of his life.
This is Jack. Jack is Ben's father. He's 81 years old, and he's a widower who lost his wife to cancer 10 years ago. Jack lives about an hour away from Ben and Colleen. Jack is active, but lately Ben has noticed that his father's becoming more forgetful, and he's beginning to wonder, is this a normal part of aging, or is there perhaps something more serious?
Now, back to Ben and Colleen. Ben and Colleen view themselves as financially healthy. Excluding the company, their net worth is just about $2.6 million, which is $3 million in investable assets, less $400,000 in debts. And the business had a recent valuation coming out at around $9 million. However, they have not discussed retirement or thought about their insurances for a number of years. They currently don't have a financial planner, but Ben likes to bounce ideas off of various centers of influence, accountants, attorneys, insurance agents. After all, he says, one person can't do it all.
So Ben and Colleen's story really isn't that uncommon, probably to most of you that are listening to this. And many of the issues that are associated with both Ben and Colleen as well as their family encompass a lot of different things. So certainly thinking about marriage and family therapy, not only the interaction or sometimes the lack of interaction between Ben and Colleen regarding retirement or spending, but also thinking about Nina, Ben's ex-wife, who has a big stake in the current company.
Yeah, or think about behavioral elements of the financial picture, which we sometimes refer to as behavioral finance. To us, that's like saying finance. The idea of biases or personal elements, personality typologies or characteristics. For example, Ben is a big spender. Perhaps that correlates with an element of his personality. Maybe he's open to experience or he's agreeable to inputs. Well, that means he might be agreeable and open to the inputs of accountants, attorneys, and insurance agents, but also perhaps salespeople and opportunities for spending.
How does diminished capacity impact the conversation with Ben's father, Jack? So thinking about a CFP professional that's working with Jack or working with Ben and Colleen, how are they able to detect some of the issues that are associated with Jack, or how can they help Ben and Colleen in caring for Jack and thinking about planning for that going forward?
Yeah, think about the challenges that Ben has, personal challenges, challenges he runs up into in many parts of his life. Although running a successful business, he clearly has, at least under the precepts of the case, challenges, avoidance of financial issues. This falls under the notion of self-efficacy financially. How could he get a handle on it? How could a planner serve this kind of client?
And with social work, which could be impacting the fact that Ben and Colleen have a special needs child, or thinking about potential, what we could describe as a money disorder relative to the spending that Ben might have, and disclosing that. What are things that that the financial planner can do, the CFP can do to help with regard to disclosing some of those debts, and obviously getting them on a path towards financial well-being. So with all of that in mind, we developed the Client Psychology book and released that last year. And client psychology we defined as the biases, behaviors, and perceptions that impact client decision-making and financial well-being. So that's a big umbrella encompassing all those different topic areas and many others that somehow either directly or indirectly relate to the work of a CFP professional, or more importantly, that directly or indirectly relate to all of the elements that might impact the client. And we see this from a CFP board perspective, and our engagement with the firms and our engagement with our over 84,000 CFP professionals, that this element of being more client-centered and being able to more effectively serve our clients is really the key to relevance for the future of the profession, and certainly for certification.
Yeah, I would call this a war on talent. I would call this really a play for the industry. The idea of what client psychology represents, both theoretically under the notion of fundamental best practices under research, as well as what it really means when the rubber hits the road, is just cornered on investor and client psychology. The good news is that there's been a body of work and a body of knowledge that has been growing, that has been codified. I think of this as this program that we're talking about next is a culmination of both the research and the practice that has been growing in the alliance we've developed at Wharton with the CFP board. We all know, I suspect at least tangentially, but more likely directly, of the potential challenges coming to us in the profession, whether it's digitization and technology, whether it's a perception of the commoditization of what we do in the profession, whether it is an increasing awareness on the behalf of some clients when they can simply go to Wikipedia and become, with big air quotes, financial or planning experts. The pressures are coming from a lot of different directions. This program and the entire notion of client psychology, which forms the backbone of practice from our perspective, is once again supporting the notion of planning relevance in the world at large. That's why Wharton has stepped up for its part to offer the client psychology program, and why we are so involved with CFP board more generally with the financial planning review and so on. This really is central.
So thinking about all of the different content areas that go back to this idea of the client, which impacts the book and impacts this program that we're the CFP board is co-authoring with Wharton. So you think about elements of decision-making and heuristics and biases, and which gets into that notion of behavioral finance, or what Dr. Gacy here calls it finance. But that element is only really people tend to confuse some of this work with just behavioral finance. They say they're interchangeable, but if you look at this diagram, that's only a small fraction of how we're thinking about all of these things that somehow impact the decision-making and the biases and behaviors and perceptions of a client. So going back to the cognitive elements, whether it's attention, whether it's cognition, thinking about clinical psychology, whether it's stress or emotions or money disorders. Obviously, the sociological elements come into play here. Thinking about gender, age, and race and ethnicity, and that interchange of not only values, but how that may impact or not impact the relationship between the client and the planner. The marriage and family therapy, thinking about household and family relationships. The perceptions of individuals' control over their financial well-being, which goes back to this idea of self-efficacy, perceptions, and then client-planner engagement. So it is, as I mentioned, as we're talking about here, it's a big, broad umbrella of areas that we think have an impact on the client.
So let me just say a little bit about the program. This is a program on client psychology that covers the elements on the screen. You can see that it preserves and assumes a client-centric model. The client-centric model is putting the client back into the center of many conversations. We teach it at Wharton in a number of different ways, but what we see from our, let's call it, lucky perch in the industry is that it's becoming arising both because of push and pull forces. Clients have been clamoring for it. Providers, whether they're large planning firms, small planning firms, RIAs, broker-dealers, those who are focused on insurances, they are responding. And so the relevance of the individual planner or planners or planner groups is at stake in part because this is what the clients want. For us to be able to serve them optimally, we have to have a cognizance and not just a theoretical notion of it all, which is, by the way, from our perspective, once again, as a research university, incredibly important to have. As you'll hear in a second when we talk about the program, we have some of the world's top neuroscientists appearing, but also we're mapping it back down to practice. The client ultimately being at the center of the push-pull relationship. Again, this is, it's a cliche to say it, but the future of the profession is now. And unless you believe 3 million years of human progress is resulting in an app, then the client and the human connection to the client will be part and parcel of the future, but not just to remain relevant, but to excel. What we know about algorithms, what we know about algorithm aversion and sensitivity is that the human element has got to be a part of it. That having been said, we have to be aware of the pressure and the challenges. So let me say a little bit about the program again. The program is for planners of all kinds. Anyone who's client-facing, anyone who has clients within firms, anyone who serves clients in any way. This is the kind of program that, in the words of one participant, is not just great for practice, it's great for my life. I don't know if it's the kind of program that fosters relationships and heals marriages, but the skills that we teach and people learn and the sharing that goes on serves all those people. In this program, we expect participants to be able to understand the underlying foundations of client psychology. Again, not just the theory and not just the brain science, but how it maps into your daily lives. Whether you're focused on the insurance side of the world, whether you're focused on the wealth transfer side of the world, if you are thinking about clients at the center and what makes them tick and how you can make your interactions with them, your communication, and ultimately client outcomes best, this is the program for you.
And even within all of we're talking about this idea of theory, and you see the term theoretical underpinnings and talking to several hundred CFP professionals right now, we describe that as quick theory as a basis, but with everything that we're doing within this program, we are asking the question, so what? so what does this mean? What does this mean to practice? So, developing and refining strategies that promote deeper relationships with clients to help you be more productive and to impact client satisfaction, thinking about client retention, thinking about assets under management and wallet share, all those important elements, and then obviously facilitating action that enables the clients to make better decisions. So that gets in this idea of behavior modification and and not being prescriptive to clients, but helping them with their behaviors that are consistent with their goals and their financial well-being.
Much of modern planning and finance has centered on the idea of clients making decisions, but not just about what happens today, but for their future. The fundamental notions of economics actually take future actions or future concepts and discount them back into the present. I always, historically, have found this idea of a separation between economics and planning to be so strange, because economics really are about individuals making decisions in the aggregate. But behavioral finance is sometimes isolating in academics and in practice. What we're trying to do here is broaden the discussion in a very practical context. The book that Charles edited, and which is now a rather famous book around here and in academia, but also in the profession, it serves as the backbone by way of topics. It's an outstanding book, and if you haven't read it, I highly commend it to you. It's on two shelves, my shelf at home and my shelf here, and that's irrespective of the program. One reason that makes it so powerful that it does bring all these different elements together, elements that surround challenges to decision-making, financial wellness, biases, behaviors, perceptions, but also takes a broad view of the client-planner relationship. Sort of contextualizing not just what we know about the client, but also self-efficacy and self-awareness of planners.
And so how that feeds into this program, and what does that look like? We offered the program at Wharton last month, and now we're talking about the second offering, which will happen in San Francisco this summer. So the lens of the client, so thinking about the lived experience that each client brings into the financial planning engagement, and helping the CFP professional detecting different lenses, embracing those different lenses regardless of whether that lived experience is relevant to an identity or to the worldview that they bring, but helping to embrace that and asking those questions without assumptions.
Academics think a lot about behavioral finance as being reflected in markets. Do we have market bubbles? Do we have fads? And it's hard to argue that we never have fads, although it's also hard to argue that you can easily take advantage of them. But that almost misses the point with respect to the planner-client relationship, because the biases that we know well exist influence the interaction and influence the relationship. So the mental accounting that is so natural for people, and the anchoring, and the myopia, and a whole series of potential biases as they're reflected, as they're connected to the way the brain operates, and perhaps some would say evolutionarily, are de facto important. Although we all want to know whether markets are irrational and respond to tweets, as the case may be, irrationally, or whether markets are perfectly rational, and should we be a passive investor or active investor. Those are all relevant, but what's immediately relevant to everybody are those biases and challenges to rational decision making. So that's a part of the program. We also connect it back to the concepts of personality typologies and how to recognize different personalities and what kinds of biases different personalities might reflect. So, for example, in the Ben and Colleen case, as we mentioned, Ben appears to be very agreeable and open, and the connection back to what we can say that defines human personalities is, at least in one very popular assessment, highly consistent. The problem with the openness and agreeableness characteristic is that it may work against the relationship as well as financial wellness. And so just recognizing it, knowing how to deal with it, how to offer best practices, even when there's a lot of cognitive dissonance between the planner's approach and the client's approach, wow, those are strong self-efficacy skills.
And in a client communication space, we're really thinking about two objectives here. So the one objective is to enable attendees to refine their communication skills, to provide feedback, because communication obviously is an essential part of the work of every CFP professional. But now getting into this element of client psychology and thinking about where we see the profession going, that communication element is a two-way street. So, with our requirements for CFP certification, we had a capstone course requirement, which was the element of refining oral communication, but that was one-sided. So relative to where we're going, and specifically with the client psychology book and with this program, it's also an element of vigilance to be able to detect some of the biases or some of the behaviors or whatnot that might be coming from a client, so that there can be behavior modification, or there can be opportunities to engage or have deeper relationships with the client. So really, relative to how we see communication within this program, it really is a two-way street of both delivery of communication and that effectiveness, but also the element of vigilance of client behaviors and actions.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one thing to be able to recognize it, it's another thing to be able to be effective about it. The client communication piece in this program focuses on, well, all the elements Charles just described, but also on being persuasive and having influence, and also practicing it. Part of the design architecture, I would say, of the program is to provide direct feedback on how participants are executing their communication and how effective they are in their influence. And so for part of the program, we've scheduled videotaping or planner testimonials or planner communication exercises where they either may optionally send in a videotape of their activity or film on site with our communication experts elements of their communication for real, live, direct feedback. And on the one hand, whenever I videotape myself, which as a college professor you do every now and then, it's a look at yourself in the mirror, so to speak, exercise. It's very powerful. It's done in a very safe environment, and it gives people private ways of understanding how effective they are. And even if you are a born communicator, which, by the way, I rail against because I think good communicators are actually, and influencers are also made and not just born, this can take you to the new level. If you find various elements of your communication styles to be areas where you want to have more practice, this is perfect. It's an exercise that you rarely get a chance to be involved in, especially with world-class coaches.
We're talking about communication on this webinar. It's going to be recorded. I think both of us will have to listen to this recording and get our own feedback potentially. So we'll be practicing what we preach.
Always.
Client personality is a big part. You can see this is a 3-day program that's it's packed. And client personality, thinking about whether we're talking about the big 5 or whatnot, but how do personality traits impact decision making and avenues where we could help them make better decisions, getting into potentially elements of assessment, getting into whether it's formal or informal, but what are things that can help help the planner better understand the client and get into this idea of behavior modification.
Yep.
So cognitive psychology, the mental processes, so we're thinking about attention or cognitive load, and how that impacts client decision making. It could be elements of thinking about in a discovery meeting with a client, or getting into stressful experiences where cognitive load may be impacted, and how can the CFP professional at least address some of those elements to help the client make better decisions.
And maybe it's time to drop a few names on this. One of the ways we map cognitive psychology into the program is through the idea of understanding resilience and optimism, focusing on skills that are important for understanding emotional intelligence, navigating adversity, enhancing financial wellness, and general enhancement of well-being. People like Karen Rivich or Shannon Paoletti from our Marty Seligman's Center on the Pursuit of Happiness and fulfillment. I don't know if anyone on the call has read any of Marty Seligman's work, but he's an award-winning scholar. Angela Duckworth is part of that lab as well, and you might have read her book on grit. And so we're having some top global experts on the reflection of psychology into practice, into resiliency, and I think many folks on the phone either know practically or know the research that emotional intelligence and elements of grit are strong correlates with good financial outcomes and levels of financial good levels of financial planning effectiveness. Decision making, client biases. We're having Keith Niedermeyer, one of Wharton's psychology experts. He's in our marketing department, but also frequently talks about decision-making and elements of client behavior. He and I will be doing a joint session on decision-making and understanding those biases as it relates to personality. With respect to psychology and also how it relates back to the brain science, we currently have scheduled Michael Platt, who, if you Google around a bit, is one of the country's leading neuroscientists. He's not just in one department. He's not just in one school. He's a professor who at Penn spans multiple schools. He's one of those researchers who someday might be showing up having won one of those very big prizes that we like to quote a lot. He'll specifically be talking about psychology of the investor.
And one of the great things about this partnership between the CFP Board Center for Financial Planning and Wharton is having half of the faculty of this program coming from Wharton and half of the faculty coming from the what I'll call the CFP Space. Many of our speakers are CFP professionals themselves who are doing research in a specific area, like Brad Klontz, who is not only a psychologist but a CFP professional who's talking about problematic financial behaviors, getting into this element of thinking about items like hoarding, or getting into things like overspending or gambling, or those types of things that might impact the client. Relative to marriage and family therapy, we have a lot of CFP professionals who are conducting research or working with clients in that space, and we devote time to Christy Archuleta from the CFP Board Registered Program at the University of Georgia. Was part of the program last month, talking about how the marriage and family element impacts decision making, going back to Ben and Colleen and how they were interacting and not interacting, and things that the CFP could do to help address some of those different issues.
Or John Grable, who many people on the call I'm sure know, both on lens of the client, perceptions of them by individuals, as well as communication.
Yeah. Age-related issues, cognitive decline. I know that this is diminished capacity is on the minds of about everybody in the profession as this continues to come up. We use Jack as an example in the vignette to start this off. Deanna Sharp, the CFP, spoke on in the program last month about not only, obviously we know it's an issue, but what are the specific things that a CFP can do to address this issue that continues to be growing?
So the locations of the program are something that we love to talk about, in part because they're rated very highly, just like the food is, which I can't guarantee, but every now and then the food outranks some of the faculty, but that's critical for this. The location in Philadelphia, if you've ever been to our campus, is a location, like many schools are, filled with energy, energy of that the students bring, energy that the faculty bring, that the pursuit of the higher order of increased knowledge brings. When you come to campus, you check out of the outside, you check in to our facilities and form a learning community. It's a magical place to be, and it's not, we don't have a corner on it, but I will tell you, our university was founded by Ben Franklin, and I still can feel his spirit. I've been here for 22 years, and every day I'm reminded of a number of ideas that he had. Sometimes things like waste not, want not, but many, many others that, by the way, are also very relevant for the planning community. For our San Francisco running, we have a campus on the Embarcadero. It's right next to the Bay Bridge, which you can see in the pictures here. We're actually right next to the Embarcadero campus of Google. We have a number of very beautiful amphitheater classrooms. We actually have a partnership with Cisco where we have a telepresence capability. It's not holographic yet, but we go back and forth a lot between Philadelphia and San Francisco, and sometimes we have to beam ourselves in sort of state-of-the-art facilities. And you can see the view. This is the view that you have from not just classrooms, but work areas and so on. To sell a program, in a sense, or describe a program by describing the city it's in seems kind of a second-order way to do it, but it is just a magical place. There's a lot of things to do, and the space is very appropriate for the city as well. It feels very much like home in San Francisco.
And so the July offering for this program, which we'll talk about registration for a second, is in San Francisco. And one of the things that we did is we start the program in a sense on a Sunday night so that folks can come into San Francisco maybe with their families and have the weekend, and then we get rolling early in the week and start the program. So before we take questions, I do want to mention that this is the link to registration. You can click on this link, whether you're listening to this as a recording or live, or you could visit one of two websites to register. You could either visit the Center for Financial Planning website, which will actually take you to Wharton's registration site, or you could go straight to the Wharton site to register.
Yeah, an easy one to go to also from the Wharton site is whartonwmi.com. It's a .com because that's what was available, frankly. We're not going to take your credit card number on that particular slide, although I'm sure we will somewhere. www.whartonwmi.com. That stands for the Wealth Management Initiative, which is the umbrella initiative that covers what we do in all areas of managing wealth and planning.
So our time together with this program is not where we stand up and just talk the entire time. It's very interactive, and that's exactly what we carved out time to have here for today. So we're going to pause for a second. You can type in your questions, and then we're gonna take we'll take 3 minutes. So you can type in your questions, and then we're going to go through them and answer as many of them as we can. So we're going to take a brief pause and go ahead and begin to enter your questions. And we have a ton of questions, so we're gonna go ahead and start. And we're actually starting a little early because one of the most important things that we didn't mention to this audience is the element of CE. So there is CE credit for this program at I believe it's 21 hours, which is offered through Wharton. So there is CE for this program. I don't know why in the world we missed that, but we did. People are asking about the book. So the book and the title of the program are the same. It's Client Psychology. You can get the program on the links that we mentioned, and you can get the book on Amazon or lots of other places via Kindle and whatnot. Question about, let's see here, going to some of the questions. So the CE question comes up here. I see that. For cost of the program, so there is it depends upon if you're a CFP professional. It's $74.90 for CFP professionals, and as well as for individuals who are with firms that are supporting the CFP Board Center for Financial Planning. Another question about CE.
By the way, you might have a question about with respect to the cost. Do you get any benefit? I was just looking through some of the comments from the first running, which were generally very, very positive, and we appreciate the feedback. One person responded, will I be able to use or apply this new knowledge to my job? One participant answered, yes, job and life. Another said, I'm a better person because of this course. Another said, I have now become a better practitioner. This is a growing body of knowledge. My firm is growing rapidly, and I am hungry for this cutting-edge information.
Yeah, I really like this question from Mike, and asking if this is an academic exercise or if this is for practitioners. This is a practitioner-focused program. So, we talked about theoretical underpinnings just because we want to talk about things that are tested. But as we were thinking about today, we spent a long time planning for the July session and finalizing that. And we're going to have a so what piece to everything that we're doing and driving that home. And we have reflections to talk about what are the takeaways that you're going to have for your practice. And one of the things that I think Chris and I are both most excited about is with not only we did with the April attendees, and we're going to do it with July, is have a follow-up call in 6 months and say, so how has this impacted your practice? How has this impacted your life? All of these different things. What is the so what? How is the rubber met the road? So we really are, it's really important that the content of this be sound, but at the same time, it has to answer the so what question. We want CFP professionals to come out of this feeling like their work is being advanced because of this program.
Yeah, I think it's well said, and let me respond from the Wharton perspective. This is a Wharton executive education program. We specialize in executive education. We train thousands of executives every year globally, and thousands of financial professionals of all varieties, and have long-lasting relationships with all kinds of firms, whether in the insurance industry or the RIA community or the planning community. We have been in this profession for many years and strive in every single session and every single exercise to make it practical. It needs to be based on sound foundations, a body of knowledge, for example, or faculty research, ultimately leading to betterment of people who are in industry, which is you.
Yeah. Somebody asked here, there's a lot to learn and retain. Kara asked this, a lot to learn, retain, and be able to implement in 3 days. What about resources and whatnot? It is a lot. I mean, it's a packed 3 days. I mean, we want folks to get their money's worth, and we want, thinking about. I think that we did through this work. We didn't discover the client. I mean, we're not suggesting that, but we do think that through the book and the work that we're doing at CFP Board and thinking about this partnership that we have with the Wharton School with this program, that we are opening ourselves up to an entire new way of the profession being client-centered. And that's a lot of very diverse topic areas of both CFPs coming and being and presenting. We have Wharton faculty, and you'll notice it's not just Wharton finance faculty, and it's not just CFPs. It's folks coming from all these different related disciplines that somehow impact practice. We do provide a great deal of resource documents to help that, these 3 days aren't just in a vacuum, that there are takeaways that you're going to go back and implement. And we found that in the first setting, and I think it's going to happen again in San Francisco, is a lot of firms, whether large firms, small firms, whether coming from insurance, broker-dealers, RIAs, a lot of firms are sending one person and want them to come back and help talk about to their employees or to their coworkers how to implement some of these things. And so we're thinking about that a lot in the takeaways that we're providing to attendees.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is how these different topics are connected to one another and how they're framed adds value. They're not, sort of lectures in a box. They have to be living outside of the context here. So, you're bringing a lot in to the room, and we expose that and talk about it and share, and then you bring it back out. But it's a connected body. So the links across. I mean, it's a program on client psychology. It's appropriate to use the corpus callosum metaphor, right? There's connective tissue across the pieces that help it live.
And there's a question here talking about, Alan asked, will the issue of sudden wealth be covered? Yeah, it was covered in some of the particularly Brad Kahn's talked about it. This element of the isolation that comes from sudden wealth and how that impacts decision making, and even looking at it from a socioeconomic element, people that have sudden wealth that maybe grew up and didn't have it, and how that affects their interpersonal relationships and whatnot. So we do cover the issue of sudden wealth, and most importantly, how to help address that issue in practice.
By the way, that's a pretty interesting question, especially because the program's in the Bay Area this year. We'll see what market volatility does, but it was forecast that there'll be 5,000 new millionaires in the Bay Area just this year as a result of the IPO wave. Very appropriate question, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned, so at the end, completion of the program, you get a certificate that is co-branded between CFP Board Center for Financial Planning and Wharton, and something that we hope that you'll showcase to your current and future clients. So question, when will registrants receive the daily schedule for the classes in July? So we're fine-tuning that right now, and in the coming weeks, we'll be disseminating all of that out to registrants. The next question from Mike asks, that was from Lynn. Thank you, Lynn. Mike asks, are there any prerequisites to complete to get the utmost of the class? But I think what I would say to that is that we want to have a cohort that we don't have folks that don't have experience engaging clients as part of this, because we don't, we're not going to have a program where all of you, assuming that are on this, are CFP professionals, that you're sitting next to someone that knows nothing about financial planning or wealth management. That doesn't make for a good time for the CFP. So we have a group of people that are part of this program that are client-facing and understand the business, and I think that's what's most important as a prerequisite. I'm not sure, you said that in your question here, you're talking about the in your best interest to get the most out of it. I think that's the key element there, is having experience.
Yeah, have experience and have a willingness to come and spend a few days with us and do some work.
Absolutely, and I see Mike commented has the book already. I'm glad to hear that. Well, excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your time today in listening and being with us. We hope that you'll visit the site and plan to join us in San Francisco in July.
Charles, thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.
Just have a great day.